and welcome. My cat is here. She's definitely going to be in my lap for part of this, I can already tell. Hi, baby. This is Dax. Anyway, I can kind of do the tail wiggle, but it's not the same without her on the floor, like walking in front of the camera. But anyway, today's video is all about respiratory infections and rats, because respiratory infections are the most common thing you're going to be dealing with in your pet rats. Respiratory issues in general. So let's get into it. My cats are fighting under my bed. The kittens can still fit under my bed, even though there's only like that much space between the bed and the floor. So yeah, they can still get under there. So they're currently fighting under there. So, anywho. So first of all, let's talk about new home sniffles, which is hold on, there we go. Yeah, that's what she wanted. She wanted to make sure I had to lean forward for this entire video. You do. I apologize for how awkward this is going to be now. But anyway, new home sniffles is a very common thing that happens. Is when you bring home a new rat, you're completely changing their environment, their cage, everything. There's new smells, there's new types of dust and dander. There's new everything to your rat when you first bring them home, and they get something called new home sniffles. And that's when they just make a teeny tiny bit of noise with their nose. I've heard it called pigeon sounds, I've heard it called clicking. I usually just say they're making noise because sometimes it sounds more wheezy, sometimes less wheezy. But it sounds like they're congested, basically. Are you gonna go already? And this is very common when you first bring them home because of the complete change in their environment. Now, usually this will go away on its own within 2 weeks. If after 2 weeks it's still there, maybe consider taking them to a vet, getting them on antibiotics. But just give them some time to adjust to the new environment. Betty? Just give them some time to adjust to the new environment before panicking. Now let's talk about upper respiratory infections. These are the most common kinds of infections that they're going to get, and that's usually when it's just like up here. It's like nasal issues. And the symptoms for that are, again, making noise, those pigeon sounds, guinea pig sounds, clicking sounds, what have you. To me, it always reminded me of two balloons rubbing together. Those kinds of sounds are indicative of a upper respiratory infection. Other symptoms can include things like excess porphyrin or sneeziness. Now, some things to keep in mind is with the noise they make, the congestion noises. Sometimes rats just do that for like a day and then stop. So just because you hear noise doesn't mean you have to immediately rush them to the vet. Just give them a little bit, especially if you've just changed their cage or introduced them to something new, change their substrate, because sometimes rats just get congested. Think of it like when you're cleaning and it's dusty and you sneeze a lot. It can happen with rats like that too. So just, if they start making noise, don't panic immediately. Just give them a little bit of time. If they continue making noise after 24 to 48 hours, then consider putting them on some antibiotics. Now, as for porphyrin is a little bit more complicated. So for those of you who don't know, porphyrin is basically red mucus. Rats get it around their eyes and on their nose, but pretty much porphyrin can come from anywhere in their body. So like they can spit it up, they can leak it from other orifices. Sorry if that's gross, but it's true. And the thing with porphyrin is it's going to be very rat dependent. Some rats are very non-porphyrin-y and some rats are very, very porphyrin-y. So like, for example, of my current girls, Lamb has always been a heavy porphyrin producer. So her whole life she has had porphyrin around her eyes, not usually on her nose, it's usually around her eyes. Now, and then some rats are more like medium porphyrin producers, where it's just like they wake up, they have a little bit on their face, they clean it off, and then they're good. And then some rats never have any. Like Baker, for example, I have never seen porphyrin on that boy in his entire life. He's actually at the top right now. He has always been a very healthy boy. So with him, if I saw porphyrin, I would immediately be like, this isn't right. Let's get him on some antibiotics. But like with Lamb, she can get pretty bad. And I don't necessarily worry about it unless I see some of the other symptoms. Now I'm going to pop up a picture of Lamb when at her like rust state, and my girl Merritt at her rust state. Merritt was my heaviest porphyrin producer. And the thing with this is if you do see an excess amount of porphyrin, it can be a symptom of a URI. And if you want to try to get them on antibiotics just to make sure everything's okay, that's fine. But if you notice that the antibiotics are not reducing the amount of porphyrin around their eyes, I would not continue them because there could build up an antibiotic resistance. And the porphyrin itself is not necessarily a problem as long as they are otherwise healthy. New rat owners often freak out when they see an excess amount of porphyrin because it's red and it looks like blood. It's not necessarily anything to worry about. If you notice a lot, you can take a damp cloth or a baby wipe or even some like eye drops and just saline eye drops and just gently clean around their face to get rid of some of that. And I prefer personally doing a damp washcloth because that gets their eyes damp and it encourages them to groom a little bit more, or their cage mates to groom them. So like Lamb, for example, again, she is currently living with 5 other girls. And Sooner was never particularly interested in grooming Lamb's face, but the other girls take care of Lamb's face a lot, which is good because her back legs don't work as well as they used to. So sometimes it's harder for her to groom, like around here, because rats, the way they groom is they scratch around their ears and face to like kind of comb it out, and then they clean their feet. So once they can't really lift their feet very well, it can be difficult for them to groom around their face. But with that group, the babies clean around Lamb's eyes and ears for her. I see this every single day, and it is very sweet of them. I love watching that happen. So yes, porphyrin can be, if you notice your rat going from not having a lot to all of a sudden having a ton, that can be a symptom of URI. But if your rat just consistently has a lot of porphyrin and there's no other symptoms, I wouldn't necessarily worry too much about it. Once it starts, I do suggest trying antibiotics to see if it clears up. If it doesn't clear up, then they're just a porphyrin rat. Thistle, for example, when I first got her, she got an eye infection, and that's why if you look at her closely, or at least I suspect that's why she could have just been born like this, admittedly, but it would be a major coincidence. But she got an eye infection when she was a baby, and she produced a ton of porphyrin, and like, not to be gross, but like yellow gunk all around her eye. It was like clearly infected, and we got that infection taken care of, but her eye is smaller now, but she does produce porphyrin in that eye. But because when she was a baby, I didn't know what was going on. It was just a lot of porphyrin. I didn't assume that she was just a porphyrin rat, and I did put her on antibiotics. Especially when the porphyrin started turning yellow, I doubled up on those antibiotics. Now, sneeziness with rats, again, this can be a rat-dependent thing, but if you notice your rat sneezing a lot, that is typically indicative of a respiratory infection brewing. My rats do not sneeze a ton. If I notice one of them sneezing a ton, then I start to wonder what in the room is making them sneeze. And I try to eliminate whatever factor that is. I'll get into how to help prevent respiratory infections in a little bit. But yes, if your rat is sneezing a lot, there is something that's causing them to sneeze, and you do want to address that as quickly as possible. But if they stop on their own and they don't start again, I wouldn't worry immediately. Again, like if they sneeze 5 times in a row and then they don't sneeze the rest of the day, I wouldn't necessarily worry. I would just assume something got up in there and they had to get it out. Now let's talk about lower respiratory infections, and that's when the lungs start to get involved. So this can be like, again, just a lower respiratory infection. It can be pneumonia, it can be lung scarring, it can be lung abscesses. So let's start with lung scarring. So lung scarring is what happens when they have a respiratory infection that's not treated quickly enough or was severe, because like, again, you're not always at fault when your rat gets sick. I know a lot of people feel like they're at fault. Rats get sick. It's just something that happens. As long as you're up to date on your care and you're trying your best to keep them healthy and then get them healthy when they do get sick, be gentle with yourself. I'm always going to say that because these are not the easiest pets in the world. But lung scarring happens when they have a respiratory infection that's not addressed, or when they have a severe one. And that is exactly what it sounds, is their lungs have scars on them, and that means that sometimes they will always have respiratory issues. So like, I'll put up a video of Summer or Bonnet breathing, and you can see like how heavy their breathing is. That can be because of lung scarring. And that the heavy breathing is often a symptom of like a deeper issue. I've had a handful of rats that have had like these kinds of chronic respiratory issues. And like with Foggy, for example, I knew it was lung scarring because she was fine otherwise. So I never really worried too much about her until she had secondary symptoms. So her breathing was always a little bit fast ever since I had her spayed at 7 months old, her breathing just wasn't quite normal. And I just never worried too much about it until she started making noise, and then I'd put her on antibiotics to address the upper respiratory infection so that her lung scarring didn't get worse. Now, lower respiratory infections before they get severe are just like upper respiratory infections, but they're down in the lungs. So your vet will hear some like congestion and crackly noises in the lungs. You may also be able to hear it if you hold your rat up to your ear. If you've watched my health check videos, you've seen me do this. And if you hear a crackly noise in their chest, that can be indicative of a lower respiratory infection. Some other things that can indicate that there's something going on down there is if you hold them. Sometimes you can feel it. So like if you hold them, I describe it as like a grinding, grating feeling when they breathe. You can feel it in their sides or in their lungs. It's like, it's just a roughness. It's hard to explain because it's something you have to experience yourself, but it does to me feel like a grating, grinding sound. This is usually not indicative of something worse necessarily, but it does mean you should get them on antibiotics quickly before that becomes like a permanent lung scarring issue. Now, next up would be pneumonia. Pneumonia is when there is fluid in the lungs. It's like a severe infection, basically. And this can be indicative of all the other symptoms, plus lethargy, difficulty eating, if they're cool to the touch, if they're puffy. All of this can be indicative of pneumonia, and it is a very severe thing with rats, as pneumonia oftentimes does end up being fatal. So basically, if you find your rat in a state where they're cold, puffy, lethargic, immediately take them to the vet, immediately get them on antibiotics, and hopefully they will be able to recover. And last, for the like lung issues that I want to talk about in here anyway, because they can also get tumors in their lungs. That's a whole separate thing. We're not going into that right now. But they can also get something called lung abscesses. And an abscess is an infection that the body walls off, basically. But when they're in the lungs, it complicates things. So lung abscesses usually occur after or become noticeable after a stressful situation such as intros or surgery. And it is a very severe thing. The rat is very, very sick. Usually the kindest thing to do at this point is to let them go, because I personally have never seen a rat have a very good quality of life after they develop lung abscesses. And now lung abscesses can be harder. It can be hard to determine if it's a lung abscess or pneumonia. The best way to do it, and this is how I could tell with Hex who had lung abscesses, is that the chest, when you hold their chest, it feels like thick. It feels stiff. It's like heavier. It's really hard to explain, but it's like they're not getting as much air in, and there's a lot of mucus, so it just feels, when you hold them, it feels more solid than it did before. There's like less give to it. And with Hex and Warren, who I also think had lung abscesses, with both of them, I ended up having to put them to sleep because I just could not get their lungs to work properly, and they were really not in good shape. All right, now that we've talked about the different respiratory issues that a rat can have, let's talk about treatment and prevention. Let's start with prevention. To a degree, there's only so much you can do. Rats have very sensitive respiratory systems. They have a very strong sense of smell. They are delicate animals. So you can do everything right and still have them get an infection, and that is not your fault. It is just how rats are. But some things you can do is make sure you have a bedding that is low in dust, but you don't want to have fleece or towels, because neither of those absorb the smell, and fleece doesn't absorb the liquid either. So basically you're doing nothing to mitigate the smell, and the smell of ammonia can also give them these respiratory issues. So you want a low dust bedding, preferably something like aspen or kildrine pine. I use Santa chips, just something that will absorb the smell and keep the cage environment cleaner than fleece. Now, if you do have fleece items in your cage, such as like hammocks, or I use like blankets, or the spiderweb hammock here has fleece on it, change those when they smell. So basically I change the fleece in their space pod every day or every other day, the fleece in their basket every day, and then depending on the cage, the fleece in the spiderweb hammock I change as needed. So like these guys, it gets changed every other day, but the others can keep theirs for a week because they don't really pee on it. Same with the hammocks is I change mine once a week. My rats are not actually huge on hammocks for the most part. I always offer them because maybe they will be. Baker loves his hammock. and then Lamb likes a hammock, and the others will kind of congregate around Lamb. So I change those once a week just to keep them fresh. An air purifier in your room can also help because it keeps the dust down, it keeps the ammonia smell down. You also want to make sure that it's not too dry in their environment or too humid. So if you live in a particularly dry place, consider getting a humidifier. And if you live in a particularly humid place, consider getting a dehumidifier. The humidity is not as much of an issue if you live like in a really, really humid place. I'd consider it, but I mean like really humid. I live in a humid place. My room is typically like 50% humidity, and my rats aren't really affected by it. So I mean like really humid. And finally, just try and keep their stress level down, because stress, like with any animal, can cause them to get sick easier by lowering their immune system. Hi. Hi. So just try and keep their stress level down. You know, that's going to be pretty easy as long as you have a good environment for them. Now, let's talk treatment. So the most common antibiotics that you want for respiratory infections is going to be enrofloxacin and doxycycline. So the thing with those is a vet will often prescribe one or the other, but enro and doxy work best together. If your vet prescribes only doxy, your rat is not going to get better. Doxy definitely needs a secondary antibiotic in order to really get in there and get the job done. So if they're only willing to prescribe one antibiotic and you arguing with them has not changed their mind, try to get them to do enro over doxy, but you really want both of them together. Doxy and enro are very good at upper respiratory infections and pretty good at lower respiratory infections. When you get into more serious stuff like lung abscesses or pneumonia, you still want these two antibiotics, but you might need some additional treatment. Sometimes, though it is rare, a vet will do a shot of a steroid. Typically, this will be dexamethasone because that is the one they do a shot for. Prednisone is usually oral. Dexamethasone is usually a shot, an injection. This isn't very common because steroids do lower the immune system and can allow the infection to spread and get worse instead of better. But sometimes it does help. It can help open up the airways a little bit more, help them breathe a little bit easier. Another thing that for severe infections, I would not do this just for an upper respiratory infection. Another thing for severe infections that is sometimes suggested by vets or seasoned rat owners is nebulization. Now, a lot of times people will say nebulizing doesn't really work. It just makes things worse, what have you. I personally, when I have used my nebulizer, I have noticed a significant difference in my rats that had infections. I don't do it for things like upper respiratory infections or minor infections, that kind of thing. I'm talking about like severe issues. So, because a nebulizer can make things worse, the humidity can cause issues, but in my experience, it has been more beneficial than harmful to my rats. So if that's something you wanted to look into, I do have a whole video on that, and you can also talk to your vet. So they can sometimes give you something like albuterol, which is a bronchodilator to help them breathe, or medications like antibiotics in liquid, in a specific kind of liquid form that helps them, like they breathe it in and it helps break down the infection because it goes straight to the source. Now, nebulizing can be stressful for them, so keep that in mind. But again, I have a whole other video on nebulizing your rats if you want to go check it out. And I would suggest talking to your vet if you feel like your rat is at that point, and they will give you some advice on like how to build a little nebulizer box and what kind of nebulizer to get. I do suggest, if you are comfortable with it, getting one just in case, because when you need it, it's good to have on hand. So yeah, that's all of the stuff I want to talk about in regards to your eyes with rats, or respiratory infections in general with rats, respiratory issues in general with rats. There's so many layers to this. It's hard to talk about. I hope this was in some way helpful to you, or just entertaining if you're just here to watch. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, you know what to do. All the fun stuff down below, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye!